But welcome to the Church of Jesus Christ. I'll say the Church of Jesus Christ, Oldham County, but I'll also say welcome to the Church of Jesus Christ International. And Sister Leah, we thank you for making us international. And I thank the rest of you for making us national. I see our own little mission here, and our mission now extends to Utah, and that makes me very, very pleased. But I also see our localized mission right here as well. And so from all of us here to all of you there, welcome. And all of you there are part of all of us here. So that's even awkward to say it that way. We count you all as a part of us. And our apologies to Mesa, our apologies to the rest of the branches that you also belong to, but we are very possessive here and love you dearly. So we like to claim you. William Shakespeare, writing through Mark Antony's voice at Julius Caesar's funeral, said this: "Friends, Romans, countrymen," and many of you have heard this part of this at least, "lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him." And then he says this: "The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones." Short explanation if we don't understand maybe some of these older words. Interred is buried. So he's saying that the good that we do often dies with us, but the evil that men do lives long after we do. I'm not certain that I completely agree with that, but it's my vote doesn't count in this case, and that's not the purpose for even stating that. Just instead to speak to the fact that evil that men do has always been. Mankind has always done terrible things to mankind. It seems as long as man has lived, and you can go back to the Bible as your reference or any other source, any other history book, to find evidence that man has always done evil to man. He's warred, he's tortured, he's all has been because he's hated. And this is as sad a statement as this is normal. This is who we are. You know, I'm itching to say the natural man, but I won't. But it is that by nature we have this within us, and it bubbles up and it festers and it confirms. And then we become opinionated and have these thoughts about other people, or more directly, other peoples. And then certain behaviors confirm that truth. That, by the way, is now described as confirmation bias, meaning we may hear good things about a people, and that we may call those exceptions. And then we hear something bad about that same people, and it confirms what we've always believed, or at least what we've grown to believe. Maybe along with all of you, okay, maybe along with all of you, I've seen more anger in the most recent years, more resentment, more divisiveness. I hear it pronounced divisiveness, which I think is a more beautiful way to say it, but I've always said divisiveness, bubbling up than ever before. Now, again, that's just my opinion, but it seems to be more at the forefront, probably louder than I've ever heard it before. But there is an anger amongst people today that I just don't recall. Growing up in the 60s, I remember some activity. I remember some anger, some separation, but I don't recall it at these levels and from the different generations that it's coming from today. Again, I want to say all of it can be justified. So I'm not casting aspersions. I'm only making observations. I'm not finding it acceptable, but I'm not going to sit here in judgment of any of it. I'm hoping it changes, but I'm not going to sit and set one person aside or one people aside. I'm only going to identify this morning. Most importantly, we process through mindsets. Okay, we get locked into our own mindsets, and then different situations confirm our beliefs. And it's important to understand that these mindsets, if anything needs to change, it's these mindsets that need shifting. Because these mindsets are creating, confirming, establishing, and sustaining anger and hatred. Again, I understand them all. I wish I weren't familiar with any of them, but I understand them all. Being one who is as natural as anybody else. Being one that battles the natural man within like anybody else. The theme today is the standard remains. The standard remains. You know, every generation looks back at the generation next, or looks forward, at the generation next, and sees them as worse. I heard a quote once that said, the arrogance of each generation to look at the next generation in judgment, taking no responsibility for their behavior. And that's what I feel when I think that. But every generation does it. When I was a kid, kind of stories are born from that. Boy, we didn't do this or we didn't do that. But it does seem that you can find the standard waning. You can find that things that were aren't. And that doesn't make them better or worse, but it's certainly, there are exceptions where some things are worse. But what we find is it's not necessarily the next generation, it's born in us. What used to be in me may not be today. So I'm not going to push this off on the next generation or on an age or on a people or on a culture or on an ethnicity, but instead say, I am as guilty as anyone else. And I am in the fight and in the struggle with everybody else. Along with this anger, I've noted rationalizing and excuse making, if you will, or just comments that bring an awareness to me, to some of these mindsets that I spoke of. I recall one time in my office where a younger man said about an older man, he was spewing some pretty raw prejudice about color, about more directly about Black people. And in his comment, I questioned him. I said, I just want you to know that sounds very raw, what you're saying. And he said, oh, I'm not prejudiced. And he pointed to this other man. He said, he's prejudiced. And I processed that with an open mind. And I thought, you know, given the comparison, he's probably correct, relatively so. If the other fellow was the standard of what biasness or prejudice was, then he was lesser than. There's not a question in my mind. He qualified as lesser than, but he saw himself as not having any biasness in him because this next guy was so much worse. Excuse me. I've recently heard this new mindset where people have said, I don't want to have that conversation because it makes me feel guilty. And what it seems, my interpretation, it seems that they want to strike entire chapters of our history from conversation because it makes them feel bad. And I wish it weren't so, but I understand all of this behavior. I understand the behavior of the younger man in my office. I understand behavior of the older man walking by. I understand that theory. It would feel much better just to pretend like it never happened. I think of the early chapter of our country and what we did to the native. I wish we never had to talk about that because it was such a horrible, horrible chapter in our history, but it was. And for me, it would be easy to strike it from my memory, strike it from my history, strike it from my conversation, because I wasn't victimized or my people weren't victimized. But then when I think of that phrase, that I would say, my people, that shows in and of itself my separation from an entire culture. And there may lie the problem. So it's all in mindsets, and the mindsets must shift. And to take it to the rawest level, and I do this a lot, this specific raw level, the shift is this simple. We have to shift from natural mindsets to spiritual. And that was gifted to us on the day we dedicated ourselves to Christ. But we allowed ourselves to shift back. Because you know what, I'm just going to say I did. If you want to join my confession, you can. Let's do it that way. I have allowed myself to shift back. Because I recall the day I gave myself to the Lord. I recall my early walk and how dedicated I was to loving everybody, to accepting everybody, to wanting everybody to have Jesus Christ in their heart. When I felt this newness, I wanted it for everybody. Have I lost that pureness? Don't know, but that's my question today. The standard remains. Do I remain in the standard? And to be clear, the standard is not to be better than the guy walking by the office. Okay, the standard is not to be better than the most natural. It's not to be better than, forgive the judgmental kind of sound to this, it's not to be better than the worst of the worst. It's to be better than the best of the best. I'm going to read you a couple verses that identify the standard. So the maximum standard, that's how I'll say this. The maximum standard comes from the words of Jesus Christ in Matthew 5:48. And I'm going to give you a pass on this because the maximum standard is so high. But I'm not going to take it off the table. I'm just going to say that I understand its difficulty. Matthew 5:48, writing or recording the words of Jesus Christ, says this: "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." And that Father is he who so loved the world that he sent his only Son. He didn't so love just the Jewish people. He didn't so love just the Italians. He didn't so love just the whites. He so loved the world that he sent his Son for the entire world, the entire population, each and every person. Candace and I met a man on a trip once who had visited Asia. And he was this kind, sweet Jewish man. And we asked him, what did he find when he was there? I think he was telling us this particular trip to Asia was in Japan. And we said, what did you find while you were there? He said, what I discovered is all people love their children. What an extraordinary overview of an entire visit to a foreign land. I found while there that they are us and we are them. All people love their children. And it made me wonder immediately, why don't we love all people's children? And if we do love them when they're children, why don't we love all people's children when they grow up? Because all people's children become adults. Where do we lose that purity in our love for all people? If we love all children. Again, I offer no judgment. I'm just challenging our capacity. No, I'm not challenging our capacity to love. We have full capacity to love. I'm challenging our willingness to love all people. The standard remains. So that's the maximum standard. The bare minimum standard was quoted over and over and over by my spiritual mentor, Brother Dennis Morocco. I did probably most of my growth under tutorage in Hollywood, the Hollywood branch, my 10 years in the Hollywood branch. And that was almost exclusively by Brother Dennis. Now I had Brother Joey Catone, who I love dearly, and he also was my mentor. I had Brother Joe Catone Sr., who was also my mentor. But Brother Dennis was the one who kind of pulled me under his wing and taught me. And this verse that he used wasn't just for me, but I sat in row 14 listening to my brother say this over and over and over again before I came into the ministry in Hollywood. And it was this verse from Matthew 5:20, ironically, just a few verses before that last verse that I read to you, obviously within the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus Christ said this, again, this is the bare minimum standard, which still remains, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, you shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. Not better than the worst. We can all find someone less than us and say, I'm better than him. I'm not prejudiced. He's prejudiced. We can all do that. What Jesus Christ was saying, find those who are established and called the best of the best and be better than them. We are they who are better than the scribes and the Pharisees. I don't say that with pride. I say that with humility. If better, not because of us, better because of Jesus Christ, better because of his influence, better because of his spirit. And unless I receive that, not just back in 1976, but daily, moment to moment, unless I receive his spirit to drive me, to motivate me, to inspire me, to influence me daily, moment to moment, I cannot sustain. I've always loved James's definition of pure religion, and I'm going to explain why, but I'm going to read it to you first. I find a challenge between those who are quote unquote religious and those who are spiritual. Sometimes there's a difference. I wish it weren't so. I think they should be just in lockstep with each other, but sometimes not. And so James defines it as pure religion, but I take it and say it's at the very best the definition of spirituality. Pure religion and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction. And he adds, and keep himself spotless from the world. So we have to be unspotted from sin. We can't be taken down. But pure religion, first and foremost, is this: to visit the fatherless and the widows. Why? Why does he use that? Because what he's saying is the pure spirituality is this: to give to those who have no ability to return any of your gifts. They don't have this sustenance to give back to you. Give not to receive. Give for the betterment of them. I've often used it's probably a comical example, but I hope it meets the mark, hits the mark. I can remember, yeah, I'll say it that way. I can remember being a younger person and being a young man and doing work in my branch, and fixing chairs, let's say in the lunchroom, and we'll turn it to me and mock me, but I think this happens to all people. It's giving to get, and fixing chairs and arranging chairs, looking around and noticing that no one's noticing. And so I a little louder with the chair, look around, so no one's still noticing. I want to make sure everyone sees that I'm doing my work. And I'll move that chair to make a screeching sound, and then someone notices I'm doing a good work. And so it speaks to giving to receive. And that's not spirituality. In fact, that's selfish giving. That's giving to get. But James is saying to visit the fatherless and the widows is with the expectation that no one sees. It's with the expectation that no one rewards. It's with the expectation that you get nothing in return other than the joy of giving to someone who needs. I ask you this question. When I say the widow, and you maybe have a visual in your mind, what color is she? What culture is she? Bringing her to America, not in Jerusalem. Bringing that widow here, bringing the fatherless here, those fatherless that you're visiting. What religion are they? What does their hair feel like? Do they have sores on them? Are they among the most unappealable? How do you see them? Growing up, I remember these moments in Winn-Dixie in Pompano Beach, Florida, hand holding my grandmother's hand as we're in at checking out of the grocery store, and she used to have this little change purse, and she didn't know that I saw this, and I didn't know what I was seeing at that age, but now I am translating what I witnessed to what I know now. And she would pull change and a couple dollars to pay for whatever she had, and I now know how poor she was. And I can remember these moments where she would see a child poorer than her, and she would buy them something, extend herself to them. No one saw but me. I remember my parents doing things very, very similar, always in hiding. I don't say any of this to pick my family up. Please know that. What I say is I was an eyewitness to kindness that I think I've fallen short. So I don't say it in pride, I say it in humiliation. The Samaritan woman, enemy to the people. And Jesus Christ embraced her. And I tell you today that his approach was not extraordinary in relation to Jesus Christ. We take that story and we hold it up and we say, even to the Samaritan woman, but that's who Jesus Christ is. And how do I know? Because I am the Samaritan woman at times. He's loved me when I've chosen to be his enemy. And to be clear, to make certain you understand what I mean by that is, when I have chosen sin, which means I've rejected him, because sin is a choice, a conscientious choice. So when I choose sin, I am rejecting my Savior. I am making myself his enemy. And he sits at the well with me and he welcomes me back. He loves the most despicable. In their most despicable, I know, because that's me at times. If I find myself with some biasness towards some people, based on ethnicity, based on color, based on religion, based on economics, based on politics, whatever it might be, is it that I'm so arrogant that I justify that by claiming them being undeserved, or undeserving of my love or my grace or my mercy? Me, who stakes claim to a God who loves me when I'm undeserving, would then turn and use that same reasoning to discard an entire people. And I know sometimes we might embrace an individual amongst the people that we struggle with and welcome them in or help them and believe that it overcomes our biasness, but we still keep the general prejudice about the people. We call that one person the exception. We bring them into our heart, but we still carry what we've confirmed as fact about an entire people, enough to drive them away from us. We have to change. We have to shift from natural to spiritual. And I go back to what I said earlier. I understand how this happens. I get it. I get how we get a mindset about some people, and then it proves over and over and over. Because when bad is confirmed amongst them, we say, see what I told you. And when something good happens, it's an exception. And so we don't shift at all, because we don't open our minds to truly loving all people's children as Jesus Christ did. The standard remains. There is no exception. There's no reasoning with the standard. There are words that are amongst our vocabularies today that would never have found their way there. Some words are kind of on the cusp. Other words are just in that weren't. I remember one of my favorite comedians as a young person was George Carlin, and he had a list of words that would never be said on television. Yeah, they've made it there. I don't know about all 7. I'm not going to do a fact check. I'm not going to go back and find those words, but some have made it on. Things shift. Standards, man's standards, natural standards shift, but the standard remains. Better than the best, not better than the worst. Man took a stab at this standard writing, and I've always loved this. I've always loved this verses. But it's man's writing, probably under the influence of the Spirit of God, but man's writing. So it's still not perfection. It's still not the definition of religion. It's still not better than the best, as Brother Dennis pointed out. But I'm going to read it to you. It's a standard of liberty. And this was man's attempt to claim something better. No longer allowing an entire people, no longer allowing themselves to just be, but instead to raise their standard of living. the standard of liberty, the verses are found in Alma 46:12-14. Came to pass that Moroni, Captain Moroni, 25 years old, rent his coat, and he took a piece thereof. He ripped his coat, and he took a piece, and he wrote on it, in memory of our God, our religion, our freedom, our peace, our wives, and our children. Now, I want to first comment on that. At the end of our meeting, we'll do it again. We'll talk about communion. We'll talk about the words of Jesus Christ. This do in remembrance of me. That's what Moroni was capturing. That everything, every step taken, he fastened it. I'm going to read it to you. He fastened it to a pole. He raised it up. And he walked, leading his people with this. That they understood as they walked, that was symbolic, that every step they took was in memory of our God, our religion, our freedom, our peace, our wives, our children. We stand for more than just ourselves. The natural man must be discarded. The spiritual man loves all. The natural man loves self. The discarding of the natural man is the embracing of all people. And he fastened it to the end of a pole, and he fastened it on his head plate and his breastplate and his shields, and girded on his armor about his loins. And he took the pole, which had the end thereof his rent coat, and he called it the title of liberty. And he bowed himself to the earth, and he prayed mightily to his God for the blessings of liberty to rest on his brethren, so long as there should be a band of Christians remain to possess the land. It's what we do with that liberty that sets us apart. You are free to hate. You are free to despise. You are free to resent. You are free to have anger in your heart. But you're also free to follow the Spirit of God, the Holy Ghost, that only loves, only accepts, only forgives, only is merciful, only is gracious, only is loving. You're free to be that saint of the Lord Jesus Christ, because the standard remains. May the Lord bless each one of you.